Hello, everyone that's joining us live on Facebook. My name is Haley, and I'm coming to you from my home, but on behalf of TEDxSpokane. We're so excited. This is the first of our salons, first of our events for the 2020 year. And so just before we jump in with Mike, our curator, and Kimber, our speaker of the moment, just a few updates. We are still on track for our big main event on October 10th. As of now, and until we see reason not to from the CDC that we're monitoring very closely, we are planning for a live in-person event on October 10th. So tickets for that are on our website. You can get there through our Facebook page if you're watching live with us, or we'll link it if you're watching later with us on YouTube. So just, yeah, we'll watch it closely, and we hope for people to join us. But I'll pass it over to Mike, and he's going to introduce Kimber.
Thank you very much, Haley. And again, welcome to anyone I'm speaking to, whether this is recorded or if you're on Facebook Live or whatever other formats this is going to go out in. We've never done a salon in this framework before, so it's all new to us. But we've been assured by Haley and our other tech people that this is just going to be great, and we're going to record it and put it out, and there'll be links to it in various places. So we're looking forward to it. We're super lucky today to have Kimber Lybbert, who was one of our speakers for 2019 TEDx Spokane last fall. And she was one of our lineup of 14 speakers. And Kimber had an amazing talk, which we'll get into a little later when we meet Kimber. But it was about our relationship with teens, and specifically the great value that teens bring, and sometimes the issues around adults discounting what teens have to offer. So Kimber is an educator from Moses Lake, and will be telling us a little bit about the kids she worked with and a larger vision of sort of what it is so special and amazing about teenagers. So that's sort of what we're going at for our very first salon. Our salon format is basically I'll be doing sort of an interview kind of a conversation with Kimber about her talk and about her experience with TEDx and about the big ideas that she brought to us and about where she sees those big ideas going now. So the intent is sort of just a generative conversation. And I believe the folks joining us from Facebook Live have the ability to send some questions to Haley. And if we end up having questions with Kimber, we'll be able to put those into our conversation. So I'll ask Haley to, if she gets a great salient question, just to put it right out there as soon as that happens. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Kimber Lybbert. And Kimber, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you found TED?
Well, I teach at Moses Lake High School. I teach AP Lang. It's a class about argument, really, like learning to use your own voice. I always tell them they have to do their final research project in the form of a speech, and that generates a lot of anxiety. And we go back and forth on this. And one day they were like, "Well, how come you don't walk the walk?" And so, and I said, "Well, I do public speaking every day. This is a teacher job. I'm up here every day." And they're like, "Well, it's not the same. It would be more like you giving a TED talk." And I was like, "Bet, like, I'll do it." But then you have to. And also their topic last year was what it's like to be a member of the class of 2020. Little did they know that it would be so different than they imagined last year. But, and so there was they had so many good ideas, and I told them that I would take their research projects and use it for my TED talk. So that's kind of how it started. I tried to.
So your kids sort of challenged you to say, "All right, show us what you got," and you brought it in a big way for us at TED. That's a great story. Can you talk a little bit just right now about your experience with TEDx Spokane 2019? It was obviously you went through an application and an audition process, and then you were chosen, and then you went through a lengthy coaching process, and then ended up giving your talk. Do you want to talk a little bit about your experience through all that time?
Yeah, it was a real eye-opener, a bit of a roller coaster. I mean, I told my students in June about the invitation, and we were all pretty excited. But as the summer went by, I started to understand where my students were coming from. I really started to get like the anxiety that they feel as they approach a public speaking. And I don't think any of us are afraid of public speaking. I think we're afraid of public not speaking, of getting up in front of people and not delivering a worthwhile message. That's what we're afraid of. If we care about our message, it's not hard to get up and let our voice be heard. And so, I was just terrified, like, this isn't coming together. And my coach was really good about listening and saying, oh, well, have you thought about? But I don't think I came up with my intro stories until like a few days before, and it was just very nerve-wracking because that's just the nature of getting up in public, I think.
Yeah.
Wanting to say the right things.
Before TED, had you spoken to a group of 400 or 500 people, whatever it was?
No, 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 just my classroom. So, well, that's not true. I gave a graduation speech a few years ago, but
that was more, I'll bet.
Yeah.
So what was it like walking out on the stage that moment, knowing that you had just sort of figured out your intro stories, and now I'm walking on the stage and I've got, 15 minutes to deliver? How was that?
Well, the day before, I had failed spectacularly at the dress rehearsal. I started speaking and then total blank. And so that was even more nerve-wracking to think like that could happen again. And I was shaking so hard. And my son later said he could see, like, he thought I was going to fall over. But there came a moment where, and I don't know if my eyes adjusted or if you brought up the house lights, but I could look into the eyes of the audience. And I could see them responding. And there's like something very profound and magical about being truly heard. And when you can look into someone else's eyes and they're looking back and you see them nodding and saying, yes, I hear you, I've been there, I know what you're talking about. That's a very, very profound experience. And to have it there, I mean, that's not something you can get in a recording, but I think we all felt it, that moment of connection where we heard each other and we heard the voices of those kids. And there were a few of them in the audience on the front row there. And it was just really powerful to see them sitting there with their parents and seeing them and their parents both nodding, saying, yeah, I hear you.
That's great. That's really good. Did you sort of forget the fact that you were speaking to 600 after a moment or two?
I've always thought that the bigger the audience, the easier it is, because the real fear is not connecting. We're afraid of not connecting with our message. And so imagine you're giving a very important speech to one person. You have a 50% chance of total failure, right?
Okay,
so the size of the audience I don't know that really affects it. You're going to reach somebody in a huge audience, right?
Right.
But yeah, there came a moment where, and it was when that connection happened, when I could see into their faces, that I was just like, whatever happened, whatever comes out, and it's going to be fine.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Good, I'm glad. So what do you, in your whole, 5, 6, 8 months experience with TEDxSpokane, what was the best part? Was it like being done, or was it what?
I think that moment when the lights came up.
Yeah.
And I made that connection, I think.
And just sort of seeing the audience and realizing, hey, these people want to hear what I have to say.
Yeah. And there was a moment afterwards, I think it was in a break. I was walking through the audience and I heard Mrs. Lybbert. And there was a young lady there sitting at the back that I had no idea she was coming. And for her to have come and to brought her mom it was a really significant thing. That maybe was the best moment right there.
That is great. That's really good. Was she a former student of yours?
Yes, she was a student from that class.
From that class. Oh, that's wonderful. Wow, that's great. So I don't know if you've noticed, but we certainly have. In the past 3, 4, or 5 months in TEDx, your talk at TEDxSpokane 2019 has sort of gone viral. I checked today, and you got it right around 300,000 views, which is a lot for our TEDx. We only have a few that have done more than that in all the years we've done it. So are you surprised by that? I am.
Very.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all our own worst critics, but when I watched the video for the first time, mortified. Like I just thought, and I couldn't watch the whole thing. I was just thought,
Oh,
it wasn't that I don't believe in the message, but that I didn't feel like I delivered it the way I wanted to, and I thought, well, it doesn't matter. It's too long. No one's going to watch it anyway. So, a couple hundred views and it'll go the way of all of the internet things that die.
right.
Quick death. So
It hasn't.
part of me really wants another crack at it. Like, God, take two, wants to do better because I'm a teacher and, you teach the same lesson like 6 times a day. And by the time 4th period rolls around, you rock it.
Well, from our perspective, you rocked it the first time. And the fact that you've got close to 300,000 views tells me that other folks are believing the same thing. So, again, I was surprised by the 300,000, but then I thought a little bit and said, well, if anyone's is going to go to 300,000 after this 2019, it might be Kimbers. So it's great to see. We really enjoyed what you had to say. So I recently reviewed your talk actually a couple of times, and just hearing you talk, I'm always in awe of the raw power of your obvious connection with young people. And the deep respect you clearly have for young people. That's part of what probably makes you an awesome teacher. And it's, I wish more teachers had that sort of deep drive there that you were able to articulate to us. Maybe they do, but to hear you articulate it was great. So where do you think that connection with young folks comes from?
I think part of it is just the nature of being surrounded by young people. Like they're the humans that I interact with.
Uh-huh.
I have always been in absolute awe of people in general. Like we emerge into consciousness from this bizarre gestational process where we're like this tiny little spark, and then we're severed from our mother and we're responsible as this tiny little creature of regulating our own physical and neural and emotional systems. And it's so incredibly complex, and it's incredible that any of us ever decide to set down the bag of Cheetos and go for a run or even just get up and go move the sprinkler, that we have this astonishing ability to these acts of faith to do something that's uncomfortable now in favor of a future that isn't even guaranteed to any of us. And so I'm so astonished by people. I'm genuinely awed by what people can do and the stories they have. And I think just if I were teaching college or elementary school, probably I'd feel the same way about that age group. But being immersed by teenagers, I'm just, I used to hear these horror stories about teenagers and teaching at the high school, and I haven't seen any evidence of any of that. So
that's a great response. Being a teacher myself, I have realized over the years that so many of those either horror stories or misconnections come about from the baggage I bring and not what they're bringing to it. And if I open myself up to it, it almost always turns out beautifully. So it's a great thought that you have there. I remember your audition, and I remember one of the big things I wrote down on the little sheet as I was taking notes from your audition was, wow, this woman gets kids, and that's remarkable. You can, if you're a teacher for a while, you can tell those. And I think that's really amazing. Were you always planning on being a teacher, or did this just happen?
No. I was absolutely stay-at-home mom. I had 6 kids. I had 5 and almost 6 kids. And my husband fell off a roof, and I became the sole breadwinner. I had to go back to school. I had to, get my bachelor's degree and find a way to support my family. And in Moses Lake, it's a small town. There's basically, you can go into accounting, teaching, or nursing. And the teaching program was only here for a short while. So I felt really blessed that it was there at that time. But I hate numbers. I hate blood. So basically it was teaching. He fell off the roof 2 days before my youngest was born. So I went into full-time schooling and I was working, taking care of my family. And the teaching program really opened my eyes to the diversity in our communities. I think it's awesome to stay home with your kids. I really, really do. But in part of me, in some ways, wishes I was a teacher before I was a mom, just because it really opened my mind to the diversity of humanity and all of the things that affect our children from so many friends.
Mm-hmm.
So
as a teacher, a question I often ask other teachers is, so tell me about your first day as a teacher. What was that like?
I started my student teaching in Sylvia Arbaugh's 6th grade, like, English classroom. And she was so sweet and so amazing. And she taught me that the only thing I really remember that she taught me is maybe the most important thing of my life since then. And she said, this is your classroom. And if you don't like something happening in it, it's your job to change it.
Nice.
And it would just always, every day I'd come in, and if something wasn't going the way it was, I thought, okay, what can I do differently?
Mm-hmm.
And the kids were, they were such a great group of kids. And so I don't remember really. No, that's not true. I do remember my first day at the high school because
people usually do.
Yeah, I was a cart teacher,
Uh-huh.
and I accidentally sent my cart, instead of to like the other teacher's room that was named Jake, I sent it to the principal's office whose name was Jake, and kind of a mess. But the kids were so good. I mean, teenagers are so curious about people. As long as they don't feel threatened, anyone who feels fear is not going to react well. They're not going to interact well with you because they're afraid. But as long as they feel secure and safe and unthreatened, they're curious. And this generation is very, very highly empathetic. So I think they know, like, hey, this is a new teacher. How can we help her? They're good humans. This generation especially are very empathetic. I feel like they are more so than we were.
Wow. Could you say that again, the piece you said about fear? I think that's really important and is linked a lot to what you talked about at your TED Talk.
Just that if kids aren't afraid, if they're not operating from a place of fear, they're so curious about other people and the world around them, and they want to make it a better place, that it's really, really easy to engage with kids if you are responding with that curiosity back instead of fear back. Because fear breeds fear. We get defensive and we close ourselves off.
Yeah.
So.
That's a really interesting thing to say in light of sort of a lot of kids' experience with school.
Mm-hmm.
I personally spent a lot of time being afraid in school. I remember that. And I was thinking, and I resonated with your statement there to say, if you're not afraid, suddenly you can become curious about the world, about yourself, about the people around you, all of that. But if you spend a lot of time being afraid, I remember reading a poll from 2015 or 16, that national poll that came out that asked students to say, what are the top 5 emotions you feel in school most of the time? And boredom was number 1, but fear wasn't far behind that. I thought, wow, if and the number was something like 60 or 70% said, yeah, I feel fear on a regular basis at school. And, and that to me really speaks to your idea here that if we can remove that, suddenly a whole lot of learning can open up.
Yeah, and if you look at the neuroscience of it, like the prefrontal cortex shuts down when you're afraid, and that's where we problem solve and get creative, and it shuts down from those chemicals in the blood.
And one of the things I thought was so great about your talk was you started by telling a story about an adventure camp, a leadership camp, and standing up on top of a pamper pole and jumping off, and the fear around that, and yet how so many of your kids had transcended that to make it a community experience. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
The pole experience?
Yeah, that was like the first piece of your talk, right?
Yeah, and that's the one that came to me right before, and that I think was what was missing, is I didn't have that piece before it started, when I was trying to write the whole thing. So there's this camp up above Spokane, actually. It's called, I don't remember. Anyway, there's a camp up above Spokane where you can take your kids into the leadership camp, and there's this pole. And I tell you, I am not a person who believes in heights, like, at all. No. But I knew, so I teach AVID, which is a college prep class. So I follow the kids for 4 years.
Wow.
And so you get a pretty good bond with that group. And I knew it. I thought, they're going to make me do this. and some of those kids, they got like halfway up the pole and were just sobbing and just like frozen there. And so I did, I got up to the top, and that last step, you can do a lot of really difficult things, but that last step where it's true, like you're taking the real risk, that is so hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing for a kid to come to school and sit in class and do their homework, but put up their hand and ask that difficult question. That's that last step, those. And I was up there on top of that pole. I bet you I was up there for 7 minutes at the top of that pole. Just like, I can't, like my leg won't do it, guys. And those kids were at the bottom, just, you can do it, Mama Lybbert, just, you got this. And they really had my life in their hands. The only thing that kept me from falling was that rope that they were holding.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it was just a very powerful symbol of what we ask our kids to do, because they are our future, right? Like, it's not much longer before these high schoolers are going to be operating on us in surgery and, doing our finances and running for president.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good point. So that community that you obviously felt was something that the kids brought with them from your classroom to the adventure camp. Is that right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I don't think you could just take a random group of unconnected kids. Well, they wouldn't have been willing to trust each other, for one thing. I mean, there's a few brave kids that would be willing to trust each other, but
right.
They build that over time in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
But a lot of that has to do with your relationship that you created with them, right? I mean, you created the space for that to take place.
I think it's a mutual thing. I think it's a teacher can't walk into a classroom and say, I'm going to create this thing here, right? But a teacher can walk into a classroom and say, I'm not going to get in the way of the amazing people these kids are. I'm going to offer some guidance if we start to go off the rails. But kids are just naturally, especially this generation, they're so naturally empathetic and interested in each other that culture develops very quickly. And I see in our school anyway, like we have a PALS club. It's the kids from special ed, and they come around to the classroom and pick up our recycling, and they used to sell snacks, and all of our kids just embrace them. And it doesn't take very many students to make good choices and be kind to one another for everyone else to just follow along. And all you got to do is kind of keep it from running off the rails, nip a few things in a bud here and there. And they naturally create that culture all by themselves if you don't get in the way.
That's really nice. It's that idea that that people want a sense of strong community, and and if you create the space for them to make that, they'll bring it with them.
They do.
And to let it out.
Yeah.
At one point in your talk, you offered this really amazing challenge to the audience. It was sort of one that I walked away with for a long time after you spoke. And that was, you said, let's draw back the curtain and see our children for who they really are and who they have the potential to become. That's a powerful thing to say. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think that probably, I said that, huh?
You said that. That's actually a direct quote from your talk.
So I think that curtain probably refers to two things. One is that, like, we're creatures of habit, right? We like to know what's coming. So in every interaction with other people, we kind of brace ourselves behind this shield of expectation, like what we think we already know, what we expect other people to do, what we think they shouldn't do, that kind of a thing. And all these layers are formed from our own past experiences, right? So I expect this to happen because this happened to me in the past. So it might be that it's our insecurity about our own effectiveness as parents, or unmet expectations from our growing up, or financial worries or prejudices, whatever it is. We approach each other from behind this shield, I think, for the most part, especially when it's our own kids and maybe we're worried like we totally screwed up as parents. And the second thing I think that curtain refers to is that there's this idea that we have as parents that if we wrap our children up in enough positive experiences and shield them from enough negative experiences, that they're going to turn out to be fantastic human beings. And I don't think our experiences define us. I think they shape us if we let them. But the weight of experience can also smother us. And that like atomic spark that allowed our children to function and self-regulate independently from us when the umbilical cord was cut, before any experiences happened to them, good or bad, that right there, that is the true them, away from all of the experiences and crap that happens or the good things that happens. That's the miracle that we need to uncover and nurture, and be careful that we don't smother and extinguish in our well-meaning efforts to shape our children's lives. And so like, we have to be willing to take away those shields of all the things we're afraid of and we expect, and take away all the things we want to give our children, and just really look at that divine little spark of a human that's separate from us, and try to nurture it without like squelching it, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. Why is it that as adults, both in our institutional lives, such as school or other, as well as our personal lives or parental lives, why do we have a hard time doing that?
Fear, I think. 100%. Well, maybe equal parts love and fear, right? Like, I've never met a parent who doesn't want the best for their kid, right? Every
Right.
parent wants the best for their kid. And yet, like we're trying so hard, and they just aren't fitting in the mold that we think they should be. You know, we think hindsight's 2020. Like, if I could go back and be 17 again, I could get everything right this time, you know? And so we want to spare children all that heartache, and we try to maybe live their lives for them, or at least control some of the pain that we know is coming their way. It's hard to let go and let them experience the consequences of their own behavior, and still love them in spite of the mistakes that they make. Because the mistakes that they make can be like horrifically embarrassing for us as parents, like make us question our own like goodness as human beings. But it's astonishing how liberating it can be when we view one another as independent creatures of free will. Like, we no longer have to agonize over whether or not our mothers or fathers or lovers or children are unhappy or uncooperative or unloving because of something that we did or some deficiency in us. We're just free to experience the world and them and each other as independent creatures who are working together to make the world a better place. But that's hard. Like, that's that final step at the top of the pole, to really let go.
Right. You know, it's interesting that the way you phrased that was that as a parent, I want the best for my kids always. And yet at the same time, I have a hard time getting out of the way to let that happen. And I think schools are similar. I think schools, a lot of time, I don't think any principal or school director or superintendent walks in saying, well, how can I make my students' lives harder or worse these days? It's always, I want to make their lives better. And yet the work of doing that sometimes gets in the way. And I'm just, for a long time, I've been curious about why, either in my own parenting or in my work with schools, why is it that those things continually get in the way of, again, pulling back that curtain and seeing these children for who they really are?
Because it's terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's terrifying. Yeah.
It is. It is. And it's an amazing act of faith, I think, in a lot of ways. To say, yeah, I'm going to draw back this curtain and see these people who they really are, not who I want them to be or who I expect them to be, or who they need to be so that I feel better about myself, but to simply pull that act of faith away and say, no, these are really great human beings the way they are. Let's create a space by which that can simply be.
Yeah. And
sense?
we have to accept a lot of flaws in that process. We have to say, they're doing all of these terrible things or stupid things or whatever, and that divine, beautiful spark that makes them who they are is still intact.
Yeah.
And if we can embrace that and let the other things go, it frees them to act on the good and not be mired down in like all of their own regrets. And they know they screwed up. They know.
Yep, exactly. Wow, that's a really powerful thing to think about. And how is it that we, either in our, again, practice as teachers or educators, or our practice as parents or just human beings, do we not do that? Do we let our own stuff get in the way of that curtain being pulled back and seeing who these people are and who these people could be, the potential for who they can be? I think that's huge. Yeah, that's amazing. Cool. So one of the great things about TED, I think, and the ability to give great talks with beautiful ideas like yours is that there's always this sort of serendipity about where the talk takes them afterwards. There's always sort of like, I did this talk and suddenly, some things were different, or something else came up, or, it opened a door or a window that I didn't see. Did you have any of that experience with your talk?
So I did get some interest. There were some teenagers who took the time to Google Moses Lake High School and figure out what my email address was, and they emailed me, and through like
cool.
weird robot system that our district has. I don't know. I tried replying to them. I don't know if they got my replies, but then I had some public speaking things set up for like February, March, April, May, June, but now, I don't know if those are going to happen ever. So there's those types of things, but really the most significant was that after my talk, one of my children made some choices that were just devastating to me. And, just the worst things that can happen. And I kept on hearing my own voice, like respond with curiosity. You love this kid no matter what. Forget what other people are going to judge you and how they're going to react. Love this child, and really listen to where they're coming from. And that is probably the most powerful effect of this talk, is that it made me walk the walk, not just talk.
That's amazing. That's really great. Do you see that playing out daily now or more often now with either your students or your kids or your family?
Absolutely. Every day with everyone I interact with, is to really say, okay. And it really comes back to that curiosity piece, right? So like, no matter what horrible thing happens to you, and who does it, the thing about a terrible experience is we would never put ourselves in that situation naturally, right? Like I would never choose to be falsely accused of something and put in prison. So going to prison is something I do not have the opportunity to learn from, because I never want to go there. So what if that happened to me, right? If you can embrace every challenge with this sense of curiosity, not fear, you can learn from anything, and you can learn the most valuable lessons from things that you would never want to experience. And so that respond with curiosity thing, it's again, I keep on hearing this in my head, like curiosity, not fear, curiosity, not fear. How do I navigate through this difficult time with curiosity and not fear? So, yeah.
That's a great statement. Speaking of curiosity, did your kids, were your kids there watching you perform, or have they looked at your talk since?
There were a few, I think there were 3 or 4 that came, and they are some of my avid kids who've been with me for 3 years,
I was talking about your actual kids.
Oh, my own children.
Yeah.
Yeah. My daughter and her husband and my youngest were there.
Great.
Yeah.
And have they watched the talk since, as well as your student kids that you're talking
I don't
about?
know. They have not said a word. They're probably like, oh, mom, cringe, like, ugh.
Oh, mom.
I don't know. We haven't talked about that.
Oh, well, I look forward to hearing when you do. That's terrific. So we always ask our speakers, when they're applying or when they're auditioning, like what you hope the impact of your talk will be. In retrospect, do you remember what you said about that? Like what you hope the impact of your talk would be?
I don't remember what I said, but I would hope that it opens dialogues that need to happen. I think someone mentioned that I can't go and read the comments on YouTube because that freaks me out a little bit, but someone mentioned that some of the comments were kids saying, I wish my parents would watch this, but I'm afraid to send it to them. And I thought that's fantastic, because that means that those teens want a dialogue with their parents. So yes, fear is getting in the way, but they want to talk to their parents. Like, That's amazing, right? And I would hope that somebody somewhere starts a dialogue that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
That's great. Even one of those dialogues would be a true win.
Yeah.
So where are you going with these ideas now? I mean, do you see this going in a different direction? Who knows, a book or a writing or more talks or presentations or I don't know what, workshops?
I am kind of stuck right now because like writing this, and when someone goes, yeah, when they connect with the idea, I love that. It makes me want to do more. And since the talk, I applied to looked at going to graduate school and getting my psych degree, or I feel like I need to do something more with this, just because I realized I fell into teaching because it was what was there, and I'm pretty good at it. Like, it's not that hard, right? Uh,
No, it is that hard, but you're pretty good at it.
in some ways, but I'm also thinking like, is this my true passion? Because, I think I worked on that talk for months, like writing that thing. And when it finally clicked, when all of the pieces fell into place, that was like that true Zen moment of like, oh, I found all these pieces. And I've always felt that way about writing a little bit. I've always like struggled with pieces of writing. Like I'll write an email to someone and I read it like 10 times. And then I go back after I send it and I read it again. And I'm like, yeah, I got it right. So I would love to write something, or I don't know. I don't know what I want to do with it, but I do know that I feel like I'm stuck right now, that I'm not progressing. Like, I'm like, I need to write another TED Talk or something so that I feel like that intellectual like struggle of trying to put big ideas into the small this package of ineffective words that
Right.
English is.
That's really nice to hear, because your idea truly is a big idea. It's an important one that people need to hear. And sometimes it takes a while to work on that, to find where it goes, but it needs to go somewhere. It can't just disappear because it's too important. As you said, students are writing to you saying, I wish my parents would look at this. I wish I could have that experience. I wish my parents would hear that message of let me figure it out because I'm going to do okay. And those kinds of things. 300,000 views says there's something resonant about that message. So that I hope it does go in that direction at some point.
On that note, I'll jump in with a Facebook question.
Good.
So Kimber, we have a question that says, what can adults learn from teens? Maybe one big idea there. And then what can teens learn from adults, if you had to sum that up into one thought?
I would say that again, that power of curiosity, of listening to other people. Like no matter what your agenda is, any situation, you can interact with another person. I don't care if it's an adult or a kid or whoever it is, and you can learn from them if you will just open yourself, take away all those shields you have of self-protection or previous experience and just say, what can I learn from this person? And I tell my students, every person you meet, they hold the secret of life. Like, that secret, everyone's like, what's the secret of life? Every person you meet has that secret, and they don't know that you need to know what they know. But if you will listen to them and their experiences, they're going to say something that's going to touch your heart or teach you something or learn. You're going to learn from it. So I would just like listen to each other, go into a conversation and ask questions. If you're a teenager and you want a car and your mom's like, no, you're never having a car, instead of saying, why not? Or why don't you trust me? Or, hey, mom, tell me about how you got to school when you were a kid. Tell me what the bus was like. Like, there is no parent on the planet who will react with anger or impatience to a question like that, right? Everybody wants to share. Everybody wants to share their ideas when they feel safe. So if you're having trouble having a dialogue with someone that you care about, how can you make that safe for them? How can you make them feel heard and valued?
I'm thinking back on like fights that I had with my parents. I'm probably the closest to teenage years out of the 3 or 4 of us. And I'm like, dang, I could have probably gotten a lot more things that I wanted if I would have listened a little bit more. But I wanted to circle back to what Mike said about some of the YouTube comments and stuff that we've been reading. What would your advice be, or what would you say to those kids if you could have a conversation with them? The ones that are commenting on your YouTube about, how do I get my parents to watch this? Or how do I bring this up to my parents without them reacting poorly? What would you say to those kids?
I would say, first of all, how blessed you are to have a parent that you want to talk to. That right there, you have an awesome starting point, right? You want to talk to your parents. That's so cool. Second, instead of going to your parents and saying and thinking like, what do I want out of this interaction? Go to your parents and find out, just start a dialogue. Hey mom, what was prom like when you were a kid? Just listen, right? And those conversations will allow you to have the other conversations. I think that communication breaks down, and I don't have any scientific proof to back this up, but I think communication breaks down when we are afraid, right? Or there's no value to be had from it. So like, I don't engage with my crazy uncle on Facebook because there's no value there for me, right? Like I don't need to talk about conspiracy theories. So as if you can set aside the fear, and if you can find a way to get rid of that fear, you're going to make these very valuable conversations. It's going to go forward, and it's going to be very incremental. You know, you're going to have this conversation today over your Cheerios, and all you're going to find out is that your mom had to ride a bus for an hour. That's all you're going to find out. Cool. You just made a connection with your mom. So just don't try to do it all in one moment, and don't make your goal getting the car. Don't make your goal getting a different curfew. Make your goal starting a dialogue with your parents, and then work on it a little bit every day. That's what I would suggest.
That's great advice.
Yeah. You can jump back in there, Mike.
Oh, anyway, yeah, actually, I only had one or two more. So, Kimber, TEDxSpokane, as we heard from the beginning, is planning on having our event on October 10th. We will have an event October 10th no matter what. It's either going to be face-to-face at the Bing, or it's going to be some form of virtual, but we still don't know where that's going to go. But with that said, we've just chosen, just last week, or a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, all of our speakers for the 2020 event. So do you have any advice for those speakers who are just getting to know their coaches and just starting to figure out how to put my big idea into 12 minutes?
You know, if I could go back, I would have given myself the advice to, instead of focusing on all of the support for the big idea, because you want to prove your point, try to think through your life for one experience you've had that illustrates that big idea. Because that big idea didn't just, like, you didn't grab that off the internet or out of thin air. Like, it is based on some really truly lived experience that you have, right? And if it's not, then you have the wrong big idea. Like, you're just copying somebody else. So go back to, like, what is the experience that made you think this, and try to figure out how you could tell us that story. Because if I would have figured out, hey, I need to tell a story of fear and risk taking in connection with my teenagers, I think I would have had such an easier time, instead of struggling with it months and months and months. Of, like, I probably wrote 10,000 different versions of that talk before I finally landed on where I landed.
Good advice. It's well said. You know, part of, I've coached a bunch of TED speakers myself, and I always find that sometimes if I give that advice early on, too early, they still can't hear it. And sometimes it takes those 10,000 verses to get to that point. But your advice about thinking ahead, sort of making it personal, making this about, where did this big idea come from inside me, and why is it now bigger than who I am, and how do I tell that story is terrific. I think that's really good.
I got a couple more. Oh,
go for it, Haley. It sounds like you got questions coming in.
I know. I'm trying to figure out how to block my thing, but yeah, you can hear the questions coming. So a new one is, how did you help your students to see coronavirus with curiosity? How did you help, let me see if I can word this right, help them to feel that they are truly being heard in a situation where they had no say or control?
So every year, AP Lang, they're assigned this research project. And so I tell them they can't do things like abortion or gun control because, like, it's all been said, right? And so I've always encouraged them to do things that are very close to home, but still they tend to, like, try to be scholarly and, write about voting or something. And so when we went into quarantine, I challenged them to maybe look at their topics and make it more real. I'm like, you're living history, guys. Like, why not do your research project on the effect of being able to finally sleep? You can sleep, get up whenever you want. Or some of them totally changed their research project and made it very, very real to what they were passionate about. Did things totally out of the box. I decided that they didn't actually have to write a research paper. They could make a video, do a blog. One kid made like a music, like time-lapse music video. I mean, it was pretty cool. So I tried really hard to meet them where they were, because let's be real, some of them are, like, taking care of 10 kids because all the parents are essential workers and there's no daycare, and tried to meet them where they were. I hope they felt heard. It's kind of hard without, face-to-face.
Yeah, definitely. Another one, which again, I feel like I could have used this as a child. How do you coach siblings to treat each other with the same curiosity and respect that you instill in your students? So I think, how do you take this home as a parent?
I think the number one thing we need to do as parents is not shy away from um, quote unquote failure. So like, and I didn't do a very good job of this when like my kids wet their pants, say, right? I'd be like, he's, a 7-year-old. He wet his pants on the bus coming home. I'm going to pretend like I didn't see that, right? Because I don't want to embarrass him. But by doing that, I reinforced his feelings of shame, probably. Like he did something I needed to pretend not to see. And I think we really need to say, oh, look, this is what's happened. And not make a big deal out of it, but look at it square head on, face to face, and say, you screwed up, I screwed up, your sister screwed up, and we love each other anyway. And really, like, kids mess up all the time, right? And it's this constant thing of mess up. And I think for me, at least as a parent, I tried to like err on the side of let's pretend those things didn't happen. And so you can save face. And I think that's a mistake. I think we don't let kids save face. We look at it head on. These things happened and we love each other anyway. And it's something you have to explicitly teach. Like, your sister did these things to you and it hurt you so much. Like, acknowledge the pain and that it hasn't damaged the bond, right? Both, that we can hold those two things in tension and survive as a family.
That was really cool. I'm ready to buy your book, so just let me know where I can get it. Any more, Mike? We have about probably 10 more minutes.
I'd love to hear more about sort of how Kimber is holding her class right now and holding these ideas in a virtual space.
So I teach AP Lang. So these kids are pretty high achieving. And I thought I was very open-minded. Like, I'm a pretty open-minded person, right? But I'm realizing that I am making all sorts of judgments about people. Like, I'm like, that kid is not going to participate. That kid probably will. That kid's parent is a teacher, so he's definitely going to do his homework great. And it's not true. You do not know what's going on behind closed doors. You don't know what's going on inside someone's head. And the only answer is always, always, always curiosity. How can I really get to know who you are and what's going on in your life? I did a book talk. A book talk is like where I assign them all to read a book, and then they get up in front of this classroom, and me and the student, we just talk about the book, right? Instead of doing a book report, because I think they're kind of lame, we just talk about the book and we kind of delve into the big ideas. And I can tell if you read the book or not, right? And so I read all the books they read, and it's kind of a fun thing. So this year we had to do this over Zoom, and there was a girl who was doing Zoom, and she had like a toddler in her arms, and things going on in the background, and it wasn't the environment I expected, right? It really surprised me. And then she was struggling with a few things, and it wasn't anything big, just not anything big. And they're all struggling. This is just an example, but I thought, okay, I had emailed her a couple weeks later, and I was like, how's it going? And she said, well, we're having a binky crisis. We can't find a binky, for the baby. And so I went back to the video and I watched it to figure out which binky the baby was sucking on. Cause there's 10 different million brands. And my point is, like, the curiosity of figuring out, like, what is going on in their lives and really like delving deep into it. So I went to Walmart, bought a bunch of binkies and like clay and stuff, because clearly she's babysitting, and dropped it off at her house. But I think if we react with fear, these students don't like my assignments, I must not be a good teacher, they're not doing it, or like suspicion, like they're lazy, they're not doing it, or whatever it is that we're doing. And instead, what can I learn about this person in this situation? Number one, what can I learn? And number two, how can I make the situation better with what I know? How can the world not become a better place? It's.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's hard in this context to be able to do what you're saying, but at the same time, there's great opportunity to do that, right? There's a great opportunity to sort of take the time to dig in individually here and say, okay, what can I do right now? And really that opportunity presents itself all the time, but when our habits of behaving in, quote, the normal, and suddenly we're thrown into this abnormal, the opportunities suddenly present themselves. At least I found that to be true with my reaction to the last 2 months and my students as well.
Well, and we tend to say we want to make a difference and we want it to be measurable and we want it to be big and we want it to like meet a rubric. And so then we don't do anything at all. Or we're doing all of these little things and we think they don't matter. You know, what is a $4 binky going to make a difference, right? But I think I think Frozen 2, the girl's singing and she's like, just do the next right thing. That's all you got to do. Like, be curious and do the next right thing, even if that's like emptying the dishwasher, right? And that's true in a relationship. It's true in a difficult situation. Like, what can I do right now? Get curious, figure out what you can do right now to make the world a better place. And you're going to make it through it.
Don't worry about 5 or 10 years from now or a month from now. Worry about right now.
Yeah.
Do something. Yeah.
Do you think that your class protocol will change at all kind of after all of this, Kimber?
Absolutely. Yes. So much. And I thought I'd dial back like busy work. I'm not a teacher that gives busy work, but when it really came down to it and I'm like, okay, what do I want my kids to know and do? It was a lot smaller than what I've been used to assigning. And that surprises me a lot because I don't give a lot of work, like busy work at all. But really, like, what I want them to do is get curious about the world and engage with the world and then express themselves. That's what I want them to do. And I want them to do it in an authentic way where it's not like, you know, abortion rights or something, you know, like something they really care about. And that takes very individualized conversations and allowances. You got to take that rubric and make it significantly different than maybe what the Common Core says, you know, these steps are.
Yeah, you've said multiple times kind of something that they care about. I'm wondering if is there any examples or, you know, stories that stick out in your mind? What's something that your students have really cared about that maybe surprised you or didn't surprise you?
Okay, so I have one student and he was not doing anything like even before school got out. He wasn't, right? Super smart child. I mean, young man, I shouldn't call him a child, probably hate that, but really, really smart, but not writing. You know, I can't write. I don't want to write. I don't want to. And so, but then in quarantine, he made this video. It was a time-lapse video. He had taken a guitar and he'd used a toy trombone, like this little, like trombone this big. And he'd played the guitar with the trombone. And then he'd recorded the sound of a kitchen sink, like water dripping in the kitchen sink, like this weird sound. And he'd layered all of these weird sound effects with like household objects. And then he had made this time-lapse video of like the sun going down over the lake. And he played this song. He made this music video, right? And then I was talking to him and he was like, did you know that so-and-so and so? And he's like listing all these great musicians and saying like, they were never formally trained. I was like, dude, you just made a fabulous argument. You did the research. You had all of this evidence that you do not need formal music lessons to become a good musician. And then you proved it with this music video. This is the research project I wanted you to do. Like, this is a perfect example. You have your sources. You didn't write it in paragraphs, right? But like after school, how often do you have to write a research paper with paragraphs? It's not a real life skill, right? This isn't a real thing we do unless you're going to be a professor. And so that was beautiful to me that he had done that. And he's going to get his AP Lang credit, even though he didn't write the stinking essay.
That's a great story. That's really good.
All right, Mike, do you want to close us off with maybe one more?
Well, I just wanted to say, Kimber, thank you very, very much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And again, I think your TED Talk really has a lot of great value in it. And I think it's a message that a lot more adults and a lot more kids need to hear, because it's that space in between the adults and kids that you talk about that we need to hold that space. We need to open that space. We need to create non-fearful places where those kinds of interactions can happen. So I think your message is terrific, and I really appreciate you doing this for TEDx.
Sure, it was fun to talk.
Perfect. Well, yes, thank you, Mike, for being our wonderful kind of narrator there. Sure. And Kimber, thanks so much. For those of you live with us on Facebook, thanks for tuning in. And don't forget to join us on October 10th. So
what's going on? What's going on with Salon stuff? Hey, what's going on with the rest of the TED Salon stuff? Hey?
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm just so So nervous. We have one more salon that is scheduled. We have one with Brady at the end of the month. It's on June 25th. So we will stream it live just like this. We have a Facebook event set up for that one as well. So you can send us questions beforehand, tune in with us live. I hope that we do probably maybe, we have one more scheduled, but 3-ish more. So 4 more during kind of the course of the summer. And then we're going to upload them all to YouTube. So TEDxSpokane has its own YouTube channel, and you can find all of these there. We'll link them on Facebook, of course, as well. Thank you, Mike. Oh my gosh, what an
Thanks, Haley. Appreciate that.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you guys so much. See you next time.